Chapter 7. Naomi. The birds sang, chirped, and flittered about between the trees, their joyous songs filling the garden. Mum's containers and borders overflowed in bright colours and beautiful scents. The sun beat down on me, warming my bare arms and legs, with a gentle breeze keeping the temperature at just the right setting. My glass of tangy orange juice dripped cool crystals of condensation every time I took a sip. Everything around me said it was a beautiful day, except I had to study. A day of poring over contract law textbooks wasn't filling me with energy. I knew I had to study. I needed to pass this resit, but my brain was not complying. Instead of taking in the words in the textbooks, my brain simply let them float on through, retaining none of them. How many times had I read the open pages before me? Maybe I needed a 10-minute break. I popped in my earbuds and nestled down into the sun lounger, telling myself to relax. My playlist hadn't even reached the second song when the bell at our gate clanged. I looked over to see a man I recognised from the campsite hanging over the garden gate. "Sorry to disturb you when you're enjoying the sun, but I wondered if you could help us." He held up a plastic bag. I didn't realise the office was locked, and I wanted to switch around our ice blocks. The campsite bell. I hate that thing. Dad installed it years ago, a constant reminder that our house is connected to the campsite. Mum and Dad saw it as a way for them to be at the house and still be available for campers, whereas I saw it as a loathsome thing that kept us tied to the campsite 24/7. A sign on the office door informed campers they could come ring the bell whenever they needed anything, and there were no end of people happy to ring that bell. I forced a smile, hoping he didn't realise just how forced it was. Naturally, he arrived after I set my textbooks aside, thinking he was merely interrupting my sunbathing. Taking out my earbuds, I slid my feet into my flip-flops and walked over to join him at the gate. With Mum and Dad away for the day, I was the responsible one for the campsite. "No problem at all," I said. The words had been drummed into me over the years. My mum's mantra was that the campsite always came first, which might sound like the perfect customer-focused outlook, but when the campsite bell interrupts your family dinners, it's hard to have a warm, fuzzy feeling towards it. Still, it was offering me a source of income for the summer. The whole way from the house to the office, the man talked non-stop, excited about the sights he would visit, playing with his kids on the beach, enjoying ice cream on the promenade. He made it sound lovely. It's easy to forget what I have on my doorstep. Back in the garden, I settled down once more in my chair. Earbuds back in, relaxing to the soothing sounds of my favourite playlist. A clatter in the kitchen had me jumping up and racing to the door. Gran stood in the kitchen, several tins and boxes of food on the counter in front of her and on the floor. "Sorry, Naomi, I was going to make a cup of tea, and when I tried to grab a new box of tea bags, I caused a domino effect and everything came crashing down." At least helping Gran didn't require a forced smile. I set about putting the things back in the cupboard, trying to get everything out of reach before Benji ate it. He might have a cone over his head to prevent him licking his injured paw, but that wasn't stop him scavenging for food. He'd already started on some biscuits that had fallen out of their open packet. "Don't worry about it, Gran. You know what Mum's like. She buys groceries as if she's catering for twice the number of people who live here. These cupboards are always overflowing." Gran chuckled. She always did like being the hostess, but I am sorry I disturbed you. You looked lovely and peaceful in the garden. "Why don't I make us a pot of tea and we can both enjoy the garden?" Gran nodded. I walked over to the door and held it open for her. "You go out and make yourself comfortable, and I'll be out in a few minutes." Benji followed me outside and lay in the shade under the table. I handed Gran her cup of tea. She took a sip, then smiled. "Perfect as always, Naomi." She sat her cup down and gave me her full attention. "What What books are you currently reading? Boring uni books, Gran looked at me as I sighed, her eyebrows raised. I just can't get my brain to engage, Gran. Remember what I said to you last week? I nodded, but she reminded me anyway. You need to have fun in your schedule too. I love that we talk about knitting and reading, but you need to remember that you're only 21 and that you need to have adventures with people your own age. She continued, her lips set in a firm line. A look I've seen her give my mum and Joshua, but rarely me. I don't want to see you with a textbook for the rest of this week. I want you to go out and have fun with Ellen. Have adventures, Naomi. Before I could reply, the gate bell rang again. 2 older children from the campsite stood at the fence. They didn't wait for me to reach them before they were shouting, "Can you let us into the office so we can charge our phones?" I looked back at Gran, annoyed at the intrusion. She chuckled and nodded to the gate. You deal with your guests, and I'll clear up here. I faced the children and forced a smile. Mum was adamant even the rude children should be treated with a smile. Sometimes that could be a challenge. When Rebecca, Joshua and I were young, we would try to befriend children at the campsite. Some children loved being friends with the campsite owners' kids. Others treated us as if we were not worthy of their attention. Even now, as an almost grown-up, it felt like kids at the campsite either thought we were cool or saw us as their servants. With the 2 phones happily charging, I decided to walk home via the beach instead of taking a direct path. The shore teemed with activity, little children with building sandcastles or digging holes. Adults lay stretched out on the sand, soaking up the rays of warmth, and the sea was busy with swimmers and people on paddleboards and kayaks. Taking my flip-flops off, I kicked my toes through the warm sand and thought over Gran's words. Was she right? Should I take time off from studying? I stopped and looked around. When you live at the beach, there are plenty of things to do. I took my phone from my pocket and sent Ellen a text asking her if she wanted to come over for dinner tonight. Maybe we could organise some girl fun for the next few days. Back home, I went against Gran's advice, picked up my law textbook and returned to my favourite spot in the back garden, complete with a notepad. The fog of earlier had cleared from my brain and I began to absorb the complex words, understanding why they were necessary. Busy with my pen and highlighter. Every girl needs a pink highlighter, right? I was oblivious to my house beginning to fill with people. My brain was trying to navigate through a particularly complex example when the sound of the gate bell disturbed me once more. Instead of throwing down my pen, I placed it gently to the side. Instead of hurling my books across the garden, I marked my place and sat it at the end of the sun lounger. With immense willpower, I glanced at the gate, a fixed smile on my face. Before I even realised who was standing there, I was already uttering the words, "How can I help you?" The stupid grin on Lewis's face had me emitting a scream. Why was he always so annoying? I grabbed my study material and stormed off into the house without giving him any more attention. And in an act of utter childness, not my greatest moment, I slammed the kitchen door, knowing full well he was following me up the garden path. The kitchen was full of people, including Ellen and her mum, whom I'm guessing had just arrived. I grabbed Ellen's arm and dragged her upstairs. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Ugh, I was trying to study and my afternoon was full of annoying interruptions from the dreaded campsite bell." I feel for you with that bell. Everyone says that, so why can't Mum and Dad see how annoying it is? Ellen shrugged. She had nothing new to say on a topic I'd moaned about 100 times before. I sighed, and the last person to ring the bell was Lewis. He thinks he's so funny. Doesn't he realise how annoying he is? Ellen put her finger on her lips and looked at the ceiling, exaggerating her thinking pose. Now, isn't there some line from Shakespeare along the lines of "the lady doth protest too much"? I threw a pillow at her and giggled. Mum's call of dinner stopped us from discussing Lewis further. As usual, the dinner table had more than just my family. Ellen was a welcome addition, as were her mum and Mum's other friend Lena, but Josh's annoying friends Harrison and Alex were with us again, and coupled with Lewis, that was not a good combination. While dishes with salad, bread and various pasta casseroles passed around the table, I could feel the tension of earlier rising again, the delicious aromas of bacon, cheese and fresh bread doing little to ease my mood. How was I going to cope with the 4 boys and their ridiculous antics? Before the boys could begin any nonsense, Sarah spoke. I forgot to tell you yesterday, Miranda, I called the local newspaper to book in an advertising feature for my shop, and they were telling me about a new competition they are going to run. They want people to send in pictures of the lighthouse, both old and new, and depending on the response, they are hoping to publish Christmas cards or calendars with them. That would be lovely, replied Mum. Harrison, Alex and Joshua started laughing. Sounds a bit lame, said Joshua. Who would want a whole calendar of lighthouse pictures? Now, boys, Dad cautioned. I sat back in my chair, save for the knowledge tonight's dinner conversation wouldn't be at my expense. Dad could talk about the lighthouse for hours, and with years of teaching college students, he knew how to control the room. Dad looked at each of the boys in turn, then continued. The lighthouse is fascinating to many people, maybe because of its long history and its prominence on the coast. For example, during World War II, they painted it in camouflage colours. Really? Asked Lewis, glancing around the table. Dad nodded and continued. In the mid-late 1940s, the lighthouse was damaged by gunfire. No one knows for sure what happened, but there has been lots of speculation over the years. Lewis glanced around the table. So after the war? Dad nodded. Before Dad could share any more of his interesting lighthouse facts, Harrison leaned in, then glanced behind him, acting as if he had discovered top secret information. Did you know about the body on the lighthouse? No one knows what happened to the body. When? Asked Lewis. Harrison shrugged his shoulders. I don't know. I just know what happened. I tutted and leaned back in my chair. Harrison, don't be ridiculous. He mirrored me, sitting back in the chair, crossing his arms and mimicking my words in a high-pitched whine. Harrison, don't be ridiculous. Which of course immediately started Joshua and Alex falling about in peals of laughter. At least Lewis had the decency to contain his laughter, slightly. Bored with the lighthouse conversation, the boys started talking amongst themselves, daring each other to jump off their kayaks when they went out after dinner. On our side of the table, we discussed our day. Mum and Dad had treated themselves to a drive along the coast. Gran had a gentle stroll around Sycamore Street, building up her leg muscles. Sarah and Ellen filled us in on their day of shopping, and Lena had been busy cleaning rooms and preparing for the arrival of new guests at her guest house tomorrow. I updated everyone on my study progress. Gran returned to her conversation of earlier and suggested that I needed to inject something active into my summer. I nudged Ellen. Maybe we should dust off our bikes and explore some of the local cycle paths. Ellen nodded as she finished chewing her mouthful of bread. I'm up for that. Me and Mum will be away for the rest of the week, but let's plan a cycle for next week. Why don't the two of us go out for a cycle the day after tomorrow? I glanced across the table. Lewis was grinning at me, his raised eyebrows challenging me to accept. I hadn't realised the boys had been listening to our mundane conversation, and now everyone was watching me. I glanced around the table. What could I do? Refusing would make me appear moody, but accepting would mean being stuck with Lewis for an afternoon. When we're working at the campsite, I can come up with excuses to get away from him, but out cycling, there would be no escape. It was a no-win question. Agreeing to it was safe face for now, and I just need to deal with the consequences on Thursday. I shrugged my shoulders. Sure. I stood and began clearing the plates from the tables. It was one thing to accept his challenge, but I didn't want to see how anyone was reacting to our plans. As I filled the dishwasher, I was already trying to think of ways to get out of the cycle with Lewis.